Hello, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jay Brown. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Programs, Research, and Training for the Human Rights Campaign. Through our programs, we work to increase understanding and encourage LGBTQ+ inclusive policies and practices. Through this work, we're building bridges and changing hearts and minds across the globe. Today and every day, we are proud to partner with SAGE to help ensure that LGBTQ+ elders have the resources and protections they need to truly thrive. And that's why we're joining forces for today's event. Today, we will focus on the experiences of our elders in the struggle, the challenges they face, and why the Equality Act is so necessary. As a transgender man and advocate, I know firsthand the unique challenges faced in seeking equitable treatment in healthcare. Having to navigate a lack of knowledge among healthcare professionals and a simultaneous need for their expertise and services. The difficultness of this, of course, is compounded by fears of discrimination. As LGBTQ+ people age, these kinds of concerns are among the many facing our community. SAGE is a true partner in confronting these realities and a true leader. Our work together with the Long-Term Care Equality Index is one part of addressing these issues. The Equality Act would be another. Here to tell us more about the incredible work of SAGE is their CEO, Michael Adams. Michael is a globally respected thought leader and advocate who has devoted his entire career to advancing LGBTQ+ equality. Michael?
Okay. Hi, everybody. It's really wonderful to be here. My name is Michael Adams, and I'm the CEO of SAGE, and it's truly a pleasure to be here with you all. I'm so honored to be part of this program with such amazing elder leaders from our communities, and with Jay, who is both a great leader and a close and trusted colleague in this work. SAGE was founded more than 40 years ago to improve the quality of life of LGBTQ older people. We do our work by offering services and programs for our community's elders in partnership with our SAGE affiliate network across the country, by advocating for laws and policies on aging that are LGBTQ inclusive, and by providing training and tools for elder care and service providers so that they can treat our community's elders with the respect they deserve. And in connection with that last aspect of our work, SAGE is very proud to partner with Jay and his team at HRC on the Long-Term Care Equality Index, which Jay mentioned. We're here today to talk about the Equality Act, a bill pending before Congress that would once and for all establish full legal anti-discrimination protections for LGBTQ people in all the key parts of our lives, in employment, housing, education, credit, public accommodations, health and services, and more. The Equality Act has already been approved by the U.S. House of Representatives, and President Biden wants to sign it into law. But for that to happen, we need the U.S. Senate to approve it. SAGE has made passage of the Equality Act one of our organization's top priorities because, in fact, the protections it would provide are essential for our community's elders. Across the country, we work with thousands and thousands of elders who over and over again are confronted with discrimination in their daily lives, in housing, in elder care, and services, and in every aspect of their lives. SAGEs work closely with the coalition supporting the Equality Act to include specific language and provisions that will finally provide the legal protections that our elders need so that they're treated with the dignity and respect they deserve as they age. Too often we hear from SAGEs constituents that they feel forced to go back into the closet in order to protect themselves from discrimination where they live, where they get their services, where they get their care. Enough. This has to stop, and it has to stop now. Our community's elders truly cannot afford to wait any longer. We need the Equality Act to become law, and we need it to become law now. Okay, so enough from hearing about me and from me. It's now time to turn the floor over to two elder leaders from our community, two sages, as we say, so that we can be inspired by their experiences and by their wisdom as we work together to pass the Equality Act. We're honored to be joined by Reverend Goddess Kennedy and Randy Robertson, Since Reverend Kennedy and Randy are our special guests of honor, Jay and I are going to take turns asking them to enlighten us on some key questions. And I'm going to start with a question for the Reverend. So, Reverend Kennedy, I think we all know that you have a life story that has brought you through a lot. And I'd like to start us off by grounding us in your story, in your past, and your present, so that we have a better understanding of what brings you to activism today in the present. Now, I know that your mother forced you to marry a man when you were just 14 years old in order to cure you of liking girls. Can you talk to us about that event and how it changed your life path?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for having me. Yes, I was 14 years old, living in Saratoga Springs, New York. I was born and raised up there. And of course, in those days, you know, parents always had say-so over their children. So my mother signed for me to get married at 14, trying to so-called cure my lesbianism, and which did not work. Um, and the course of it was that I was determined not to get married. She was determined for me to marry. Long story short, I ran away from home, joined the Air Force, passed the test, was in Waco, Texas, and really thought I had gotten away. Mother had private detective, and long story short, I was in the Air Force exactly 14 days. And there she was, her and the private detective, and everybody there. I got a meritorious service for wanting to serve my country, returned to Saratoga Springs, long story short, got married at 14, June 7th, 1953. The only one-upsman I had on my mother was she had picked out someone for me to marry. And being back and forth in New York, my grandmother on my father's side lived here. And so I had been back and forth to New York. And I used to hang out this little storefront church. And they were getting ready to put the minister out because he was not married. And we sort of like struck a deal. Called my mother, told her, well, I'm in love, I'm marrying a minister. And of course, she was thrilled. And the result of it was, yes, I did get married. However, when it was found out about what had happened, and it was really illegal for what she did, although the marriage was consummated, it was annulled, which I think saved Mother Dearest from going to jail.
Thanks, Reverend Kennedy.
I know you also have, oh, there we go. To Randy. Randy, I know you have an incredible life story too. You rose to rank of Lieutenant Colonel during your 22-year career in the Air Force, which is phenomenal. Thank you so much for your service. I believe you retired in 2010. How do you feel about what you saw as a service member in regards to Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and other discriminatory treatment?
Mm-hmm.
I lived through my career, took me through the entirety of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell era. And the end of my career, the end of 2010, I was actually privileged to be in the auditorium at the Pentagon when Jay Johnson, then the General Counsel for the Department of Defense, along with the Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, briefed many of us who were on staff in the Pentagon, military personnel. Not saying the end of Don't Ask, Tell was for certain, but setting us up to ensure that we were thinking about the policy pieces that were an inevitable outflow from that. And interestingly enough, as I stood in the back of the auditorium, I got there too late to have a seat, the thought that crossed my mind was, this is great for my friends in the service who are LGB, but for me as a trans person, this was never going to, the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell was never going to affect me and my ability to continue to serve. And so it was a mixed bag. It was good and it was bad all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Randy. Reverend Kennedy, I want to ask you a question. Obviously, you share with us just a little bit about your life path so far in our program, and I think we all know that in our fight for LGBTQ rights, we've made some progress. We've made some advances. So, what I'd like to ask you is, what are the advances that stand out to you and how have they impacted your personal life? And by contrast, where are the areas where you think that we're still really falling short in terms of, really still facing serious challenges with discrimination without the protections we need? So both advances and falling short. What's your take on that?
Well, the biggest thing was like going back to being involved in Stonewall in 1969. Who knew? 52 years later, here we are. But the thing is, the most important thing is that backwards, never, forward, ever. And that's been like a slogan with me. And the thing that I'm really, really very concerned about is what is happening with our transgender youth and what's happening with our youth, period. I mean, it breaks my heart to know that even today, as we speak, young transgender youth and gay youth are still living on the piers in New York. And so the fight has to continue. People must, it's absolutely a must that everybody talk to their congressmen, their state people, their state chair people, whoever it takes to get the message out that this is not over and it's still going on. And on that point, I will transcribe just 1 minute. There is in Brooklyn right now an exhibit called Not Another Second, a book by the same name. The proceeds from that book, Watermark is taking on getting housing for youth. So I'm definitely pushing for people to get the book and add to the fact that this housing is needed and legislation is needed. The Equality Act is one of the most important things that's happening today, but us and the gay community and transgender community and these community, it is up to us to really make sure that the Equality Act deals with us as young, old, elder, whatever, in this community, and that we are thoroughly represented.
Yeah, thank you, Reverend Kennedy. And I think Randy, to you, you mentioned how Don't Ask, Don't Tell didn't help trans service members, and and then you obviously, as many of us, watched sort of progress and then setbacks and then progress again. So same question to you. Now, when you think about where we are when it comes to LGBTQ rights, and the Reverend certainly touched on two pieces that are so front of mind for me, where we're falling short. Sorry, my dogs are joining the conversation. Apologies if you can hear that. I'll let you take that over, Randy. What do you think?
Progress, when we look at the battle for civil rights, or the struggle, it's probably a better term, for civil rights in our country, which extends back hundreds of years, it has always been a struggle, right? It's always been a struggle. It's never been an easy path. It's always been bits and pieces at a time. And I think we have to, on one hand, fight against that, but we also have to recognize that that's just part of the reality. Doesn't mean we don't keep struggling. It doesn't mean we don't keep working hard to do those things. But we can either be overrun by the negatives that come, and we've certainly seen, when you look at the policy relating to service in the military, it went from one extreme to another, and we're, at least in my opinion, in a much better place than we were, but it's still not perfect. The devil's in those details, and the details flow out when we have overarching legislation that says we're going to treat everybody equally. So interestingly enough, right now, we're back to in the Department of Defense where transgender service is allowed because it's a policy issue. And interestingly enough, individuals who are transgender now are again covered with the medical care necessary for those of us who are transgender in the process. But here's the interesting part. I'm a retiree. I'm not covered by that at this point. Even though I am, quote, covered by the same basic healthcare system, I'm not covered. It's the devils are in the details. And if we enact the Equality Act, suddenly all those little details that live all across U.S. code, U.S. law, and policy will be dissolved. We'll have the tool to go to the administrative organizations and leaders and say, you've got to comply, and this is what compliance looks like.
All right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that, Randy. That's really powerful. And Reverend,
Yes.
I want to turn it back. I want to turn it back to you. And I actually appreciate you mentioning the Not Another Second exhibit, because one of the things that is so beautiful and powerful about that exhibit is you, and the fact that you are featured and spotlighted in that exhibit. And one of the things that's striking when I went to see that exhibit was learning about so many different parts of your life, that you've been an activist in so many different movements. And that makes me want to ask you, what message would you want to deliver to today's activists, to younger activists who are trying to figure out themselves how to move the needle, right? How to advance, how to bring progress? What advice, what message would you want to bring to them?
Well, first of all, the thing is, I talk to young people all the time. One of the things is I am the grandmother of the National Action Network Youth Movement, Reverend Sharpton's organization, which I'm also one of the founding members of the organization. And my story is this: love yourself, live your truth, and laugh in the face of adversity. Because that way, it's like you are staying focused on who you are. And that's the most important thing. So if you learn to love yourself, live your truth, laugh in the face of adversity, everything else will fall into place.
That's why we call you Sage, Reverend Kennedy. Thank you.
Vein, you said that the struggle for justice, Randy, is just that. It's a struggle, and it will always be so for marginalized communities. It's our struggle, and it has to be that way. So maybe our struggle can't be overcome. Maybe enduring it is part of what we're doing here. But how do you make it easier? What is your advice to folks, and especially when we're thinking about the Equality Act and what we need to make it easier?
So the struggle is always maybe part of it, at least for marginalized and certainly for marginalized groups, because if you're not in that marginalized group, you don't understand the need. You don't understand that there is a struggle. Even in many cases, it doesn't mean people are uncaring or uninterested. They just don't understand. And so it is left to us to carry that forward, to put forward who we are and what we need and why we need it. And so that's always probably going to be part of it. We're probably always going to have to manage that. Now, that doesn't mean that forever and always LGBTQ people are going to have the struggle. But if it's not us, it's going to be somebody else. And we have as big a responsibility to those other groups as we have to taking care of ourselves in this struggle. And so right now it's the Equality Act, and interestingly enough, the Equality Act is going to reach farther than just LGBTQ rights, and that's what a lot of people fail to realize. It's ultimately much bigger than that. So this struggle even now reaches beyond, and we've got to keep that in mind as we advance this right and just struggle.
So, Reverend Kennedy, speaking of going big, picking up on Randy's comments, I want to ask you a question about faith. You know, some opponents of the Equality Act ground their opposition to our rights to equality in their interpretations of faith. I want to ask you, what's your perspective on how faith and LGBTQ equality and rights coexist?
Well, first of all, these so-called, I say so-called Christian people, they base their whole theory on the King James version of the Bible of Sodom and Gomorrah. It was supposed to have been destroyed because of homosexuality. And of course, for years I was saying, like, you know, science versus religion. Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed because there was a lava eruption, and that's why the city was destroyed. It had to do with homosexuality. On the other side of that, I tell people that God loves us, God, Goddess loves us just the way we are. And then finally, when they get too down, I say, look, none of y'all have a heaven or hell to put me and any of the LGBTQ people in. So get out of our face, leave us alone, and you keep on praying to whatever you're praying to. But know that God loves all of us just the way we are.
Thank you very much. I love that. Randy, so as a trans person, what do you see are some of the complications, especially related to aging and care, and some of the ways that the Equality Act could make a difference for us in dealing with some of those challenges?
As we all know, at least all of us in the conversation today, as we all know, as we get older, life gets more complicated. Amazingly, a little over a year ago, I found myself in the emergency room in the local medical center, and it started an 11-day saga of inpatient care. And amazingly, I was treated marvelously, and I live in one of the most Republican counties in the state of Florida.
Whoa.
From the nurses and the physician's assistants was astounding. They always got my gender right. They were always kind and gracious and respectful. And the surgeon who ultimately did the surgical procedure that needed to be done, although a good surgeon, did a great job. He just, an older gentleman, has actually since retired, just couldn't apparently wrap his head around the idea of a transgender person and misgendered me. Interestingly enough, it's one of those things where it's that, again, it becomes a trickle down of things, because if we get something like, or if we get the Equality Act in place, suddenly doctors, nurses, the training requirements, the retraining, the continuing ed requirements now can start to encompass all of these things that make the spaces more friendly to us, not just in acute care settings, but in doctors' offices and in long-term care facilities, where our vulnerability, like you said at the beginning, Jay, is profound. Every time you go to a new doctor, you get to out yourself. Wow, that's an exciting experience, and you're going to have to trust that the advice and the care that you get from them is going to meet your needs and going to account for that. And so that's a real struggle. And so the Equality Act will go a long ways to ensure that through law and through those processes that the federal system will start to push, and that will go, and it will go further than just the LGBTQ community. It will have longer reach than just our community to ensure appropriate care is accessible and is welcoming to minority groups, not just us.
Yeah, I so appreciate that. And a lot of the work we do in both of our organizations is training oriented. And I'm very enthusiastic about the opportunities ahead of the Equality Act to reach even more audiences with the educational tools that will be needed to hopefully improve our life experiences. So I really appreciate that. I have a question for you, Michael. So as you grow older as an LGBTQ plus person, I'm curious, how's your perspective changing? And can we learn from anything from that change in perspective? What do you have to share with us on that?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question, Jay, and it feels kind of timely. I'm turning 60 in October, so inside Sage we call 60 Sage age. So I'm, I guess I'd say a couple of things. One is, I think over time I've started to better understand how precious time is. I have been an activist in our communities for almost 40 years. I don't go quite back to Stonewall as Reverend Kennedy does, but almost 4 decades. And the entire time that I've been an activist in our communities, we've been fighting for this federal law, right? These federal protections, so that we have the same basic rights that everybody else in society does in terms of protection from discrimination. And here we are 40 years later. We really don't have, we can't keep waiting, right? So I feel like I've learned a lot as I've got older about how precious time is. I guess something else I would say is I've also learned a lot about how strong we are as people, and how strong we are as a community. When I was in my early 20s, we were living through really the worst of the AIDS epidemic, you know, those early years of AIDS. And I lost, you know, close, dear friends at a very young age, and they were at a very young age. Beautiful people, beautiful men who were really just starting their lives, right? We lost so many people. There was a time when I think we all thought we would die. We thought we would never make it. But the fact is, many of us lived. Many of us lived. Many of us survived. We survived to continue fighting for our rights. Now we're living through a second pandemic, and we've again lost people. And we've lost people that are so close to us. And again, many of us are living. And we will continue to fight, right? So nobody should ever underestimate our strength and our determination. I guess those are some of the things I've learned with the passage of time. And Jay, I'm going to throw that question back at you. And you're, I think, not quite as old as I am, but we're all aging. So would have been some of what you've learned.
Yeah, a very wise colleague of mine just said, one thing we know we all have in common is that we're all a day older than we were yesterday. If we're having that conversation. You know, I love that Reverend Kennedy brought the young people into the conversation, because I really do think about the spectrum of all of this life's journey, and of what the impact of the Equality Act would have on our entire community. And one thing that I think a lot of folks, when they think about aging, they go to older folks, but we are all aging every day, and we are all journeying. And in fact, so the need for the young folks to have protections that don't stop at a state line, that really are clear and explicit to the educational leaders in this country, to me is one of my highest priorities. But I just came back from a trip where I got to spend some time, somebody I've known for years who's in their 80s and is going through a transition. And, you know, I think about that person who you know, is independently living now, but needs support, needs community, and may find themselves in a place where they want, you know, their gender expansive identity to be reflected or respected, and for their life to be sort of cared for in the way that our young people deserve too. So, I mean, I think the thing about the Equality Act is that it would really touch our entire community. And I am, as I'm thinking about aging, I'm thinking about sort of what that means to all of us as we age, and how pivotal the Equality Act could be to us. So I guess with that, I'll turn it over to Randy, and then Reverend Kennedy. Maybe you can close it out, which is what would it mean to you personally, Randy, for the Equality Act to pass?
So I'm a professional pilot. It's what I've made my livelihood doing. And so I travel. Part of what I do is I travel. And one of the weird things that exists right now is if I fly into certain states, are my rights as a U.S. citizen for protections less than if I'm in another? Well, given the current legal structure, that's absolutely the case. I have more rights in some states than in others, and that should not be. I should be able to have the same expectation of care and be able to use, you know, public facilities. It shouldn't matter that I'm in state X, Y, or Z. It should be universal across our nation, and the Equality Act brings that. It brings that for all of us. So it doesn't matter aging, not, you know, whether you're a little bit older or a little bit younger, it doesn't matter. And that's the important part. Regardless, we've got to get to where it doesn't matter where you grew up, where you're growing up, whether you have access to to the right care, to the care that the physicians say that we need, and those kinds of things. And that's what the Equality Act means to me. It means safety where I go. It means that I don't have to worry about having a book or a pre-studying to make sure I can stay safe in a given space.
Reverend Kennedy?
Yes. I love so much what Randy has said. You go, listen, you go, gal, you go, sister, right on. The thing that to me is that here we are, 2021, we're in the 21st century, and with the Equality Act, again, it is of the utmost importance that everybody that sees this talk to their Congress people, talk to the Senate, talk to anybody that you need to. Because for me, as a person of color, being half Native American and half Black, we have been here, us people of color, and especially Black people, have been here on this continent since 1619. That's 402 years. So here we are fighting, and we're involved in the struggle, and the struggle continues, and it will not stop. It must not stop. We must all continue to put our shoulders to the grindstone, as they say, and get this thing done. I'm hoping for the day that my grandchildren, my great grandchildren, by the way, I got 20 of those, and my great great grandchildren, got 2 of them, this will all be resolved. Everybody will be living, and equality will not be something that we have to even talk about, because in the centuries to come, it just is. And we are the ones that made it possible.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Reverend Kennedy and Randy. I want to thank you both and Michael for sharing your time and experiences with all of us. I know I speak for many of us when I say that I'm so deeply inspired by your leadership and your advocacy. And I think as all of us who have been listening here with us today have heard, our elders have carried the movement in our community for so long, securing rights and broadening futures and helping many reach dreams that we all thought were impossible. So now we must fight alongside each other and make sure that our elders experience the inclusion, support, and welcome that you all are helping make possible every day and help make possible in the past. So thank you so much. That starts with the Equality Act. For more information, we always encourage folks to go, HRC members can go to hrc.org/Equality Act, or folks can text Equality Act at 472-472 to get involved. And I'll turn it over to you, Michael, to close us out.
Okay, thanks so much, Jay. And I want to again thank Reverend Kennedy and Randy Robertson for your wisdom today. And I want to thank you, Jay, and HRC for being such important partners with SAGE in ensuring that the voices and the interests of our community's elders are really front and center in the campaign for passage of the Equality Act, because that's where our elders need to be. So please do everything you can to get involved in the campaign for the Equality Act. I'd ask everybody who's watching this to please get involved. You can go to the HRC website. You can go to sageusa.org/Equality Act to get involved. As Reverend Kennedy said, as Jay said, as Randy said, let's join together. Let's get this done for everybody in our community, for our elders, for our young people, for all of us. So thank you so much.
We will not be invisible.
We will not be invisible. Amen to that.
Amen. Go right there.
Here.
Indeed.
Thank you all.
Thank you.